to the May Data Simplified event. We have a great program prepared for everyone here. We have our guest speaker, uh, Kevin. Hi, Kevin.
And Anthony, thanks for having me. A pleasure to be here.
Yes, it was great having you too. We're going to have a great discussion today around data visualization. So if you're ready, how about we just jump right in?
Get at it.
All right. So our focus today is going to be on data visualization and storytelling. We're looking at techniques, tools for converting complex data into compelling narratives and visual stories. We're going to want to break this down and understand better what is it that we're talking about and how it can help our business, particularly if you're business leaders, you want to pay attention. So Kevin, how about you start with telling us what is data visualization? How can we define that?
Yeah, it's any type of visual component on top of raw data. So you think of, people think of charts like bar charts, line, but it doesn't really matter the type of chart. It's a way that you can display data visually because the brain processes things visually first. So if you want to see a trend, like a year over year trend, when you draw it as a line chart and you see a line, the brain picks up, hey, there's a trend that's going down or up. Whereas if you just see like a spreadsheet with raw data, the brain has to work a little bit harder to look at the different dots and then in its mind build the line. So that visual saves the work of the brain having to connect those dots for us. Sometimes it is a visualization like a line chart or a bar chart. Sometimes it's just numbers, though. It's just a summary. It's anything that helps the brain and us interpret the raw data better to find patterns, trends, understand KPIs. All encompassing, I would put that as data visualization.
Okay. And I love, Kevin, that you went into detail about different types of data visualization and how we're maybe used to telling, to seeing it, right? And then can you talk a little bit about software or perhaps putting it together? Because I know you talk about graphs and charts. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of tools out there. Probably the most common one people have is Excel because they're used to it with data,
Hmm.
right? And everyone has the Microsoft Office products. Is you could have some columns in Excel of the data, and you can use their visualization tools just to visualize what I described, what you're seeing, like a line chart or bar chart or a pie or a donut chart. But there's also specialized software out there. Sometimes they're called data visualization tools. Sometimes they're called business intelligence tools. I mean, pretty much nowadays, everyone sees the value of visualizations. I almost think every type of software has like an analytics component, and they usually use visualization. So there are specific tools like Tableau and Power BI and Click and so in Excel, but there's also visualizations that come in project management software. So if you're a project manager and you're using something like Monday.com or you're using Trello, there's visualization components. Or if you're using Salesforce, there's visualization components. So standalone tools, but it's becoming ubiquitous that you can visualize pretty much data in any software nowadays, which is great if we do it the right way.
Right, right. So you talked a little bit about some software and you said project management and others. Is there someone in particular in the business realm, in the, whether it's a C-level executive or other, that should be like on top of this, bringing data visualization into the process?
Absolutely. I mean, realistically, I think the C-suite should be pushing for data informed decisions. And you do that, visualizations are the vehicles for doing that. Many times it's an IT org that might do the procurement that bring things in.
Mm.
Sometimes we hear people say, well, you know what, I don't need like a data visualization tool because the whole company aren't, data analysts. And I guess it's a good point to mention that for me, there's really two main purposes for a visualization. There's to find those insights yourself. So you're a data analyst and you understand the data, you're finding those insights, but that's really just for you. And that's the one that most people forget about is you want to do that, but then you want to communicate those out. So you do a paper, you do a monthly report, you do an SEC filing, you do whatever, you have those visuals. They're not the same visuals. You kind of want to simplify them and only show what's relevant to the stakeholder. So I think anyone in an organization should be familiar with visualizations. Even if they're not creating them, they need to learn how to consume them.
Right. So it seems like everyone needs to be data literate.
Yeah, I would love that.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. In an ideal world, absolutely everyone. That's one of the things that we're pushing for, data literacy, from the boardroom all the way down to the mailroom. Absolutely everyone needs to be data literate. Like you said, you have to be able to interpret these and understand, right? Awesome. And so because you talked about how it should be in different parts of the practice, so how important is now storytelling with data visualization? And how do the two go together?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, like there's two main types. There's like the visualization to come up with your insights. And in those ones, you don't really care about storytelling much. You're like, I have a problem. I want to say, how are my education sales trending? I'm going to look at all the visual, find that stuff out. But then I find the answer. And then the next step is, okay, how do I communicate that to the relevant stakeholders? And you have to understand a little bit about the stakeholder. Are they familiar with the data? Are they familiar with the business domain? Are they familiar with visualizations? And based off of that, you kind of want to summarize it. But the problem is, if you just show them a visualization, I mean, visualizations are great for showing trends, refining what you need. So they don't have to interpret all of this raw data. But at the same time, the human brain wants to make a connections like what's in it
Mm,
for me. And
yeah.
that's where the storytelling comes in. So yes, a visualization should stand on its own, but you need to weave the story around what is the data saying? Why is it saying it? Why is it important to me? And I kind of have three characteristics for that storytelling is if you can make it so that it's engaging, if you can make it so it's persuasive, because a lot of times you're sharing it because you need people to act, right?
Mm,
So if they just say, I understand, but it didn't motivate me or persuade me to act, didn't really go all the way. And then it needs to be memorable because they need to remember it. We're exposed to so much stuff. The things that I truly remember doing well in change management were the ones where I still remember the story with the visual.
Right. And that's what I think we spoke earlier about the art of data storytelling. So that's kind of where that comes in, right?
Absolutely, because it's almost paradoxical. Because on one hand, I teach data visualization at university levels, and a lot of people coming into the course, they're like, I just, I don't know. I just use a pie chart. I just use a line chart.
Mm,
It looks pretty. I overload it with information. What they don't realize is from that angle, there's really a science to it. It's like if your data is categorical and you're trying to show a comparison, this is the chart you use. But then when you apply storytelling, it's the opposite. It shouldn't be a science. It needs to be an art. You need to be empathetic to the stakeholder. You need to understand the stakeholder, and you need to build a narrative, as I said, that's engaging, memorable, and persuasive. And that's an art. I mean, you can use frameworks like they use in movies to build a climax to get everyone excited, where you love the hero, you hate the villain, and you stay and you suspend disbelief. But at the end of the day, you need those same skills now with the story. It's just harder because you also have data involved. And
hmm
sometimes, talking about what's wrong with that, sometimes when newer people are using storytelling with data, they throw all the data they have into the story. And that's the worst thing you can do because the brain's just like, I have no idea what you just said. You
It's
just
too much.
cited
Yeah.
82 statistics and everything on buried. So it's an art because you have to balance what's the right level of data and visuals to show, and then what's the right story for the right audience.
Absolutely, yes. And so you talked a little bit about our narratives, and so can we go into that a little bit more about data-driven narratives and how to improve them with our
Yeah.
storytelling?
So, I mean, it goes back to what I said before. You have to understand the stakeholder. And what I mean by that is if I'm talking to the C suite, I'm not going to give them the equivalent of a full movie because I lose them. They have 10 minutes or whatever. So I need to kind of truncate that a little bit and say, okay, here was the problem. Here's the resolution. Here's how it's going to help us. Like that's it. But then if you're talking to stakeholders that are the employees that are going off and doing the work, it's not that they don't trust you, but they need to understand the story. They need to know, okay, why are we in this situation? How is that
Mhm.
going to impact us? So it becomes almost like a framework where the bits and pieces get slotted in based off of what level they are of a stakeholder. Are they someone who needs to do the work? Are they someone that just needs to be responsible for it? And part of it is trial and error because you might run into a situation where an employee just wants what's the problem? What's the resolution? How's it going to help us? But, for the most part, you save those for the executives, and then for the workers, you give them the longer story, which sets here's where we were, here's where we are now, here's how it's impacting us, here's the data. What does that mean long term if we don't change it? That's the climax, the crisis. Oh my God, we have to fix this. And then you show the data of this is what our intervention is. This is how we're going to drive it. I've been using a framework like that for a while, and it really resonates because it's mass personalization. You can't personalize every story to every user, but if you do it based off of stakeholder groups, it becomes a lot more effective.
Right. So can you give us good examples of like a data story and like how to build it and what makes that a good example, or maybe bad examples, like what not to do?
Yeah, one of my favorite examples, and I don't take credit for this, I just take credit for sharing it, was the CEO of Intel way back a couple decades ago. He was giving a story with data to his stakeholders. And his stakeholders at this point were people that were board of directors, people who own stock. Not everyone understands the semiconductor industry. So what he was trying to do was he was trying to paint the story with data of how far his business moved the microchips over the past year. And if he said things like our nanoprocessors are 10x smaller and they're 5x cheaper and they're 3x faster, people don't know what to compare it to because they don't know the stakeholder industry.
Right.
So he says that, but he's like, and then all fairness to everyone in the car industry, if the automobile industry had the same efficiency and gains, we today would be driving cars that run 500,000 miles per gallon, that can go 100,000 miles per hour. Everyone understands cars. So everyone's now imagining, wow, what would it be like to have a car that can go 500,000 miles with one fill up? And man, I don't need a plane anymore. I could go to LA in 3 hours because they can relate to it. So that's an example where he had a lot of data he needed to share, but he knew it'd be lost on the stakeholders because they wouldn't understand because they weren't too familiar with microchips. It's more of a niche industry. Some of the bad examples, I mean, there's famous ones, like unfortunately with NASA and the Space Shuttle Challenger, it blew up for many reasons. There was not like a single reason, but one of the things that's often cited in a postmortem is the engineers that made the O-rings, the things that actually failed, knew that there was a very high likely chance it was going to fail the morning of, because what they had realized is the colder it is outside, the harder the O-ring gets, the more likely it is to crack. And it was going to be a very cold morning. They didn't tell storytelling the right way to the NASA engineers. And again, many other things came in like groupthink and bias and, it won't happen to us. But had they had a narrative maybe more similar to the Intel CEOs, maybe people would have been, oh my God, that could be catastrophic.
Right.
Maybe let's run another set of tests. Again, it wasn't that sole thing.
Let's take action.
Exactly. Yeah. But they didn't. And they shared charts and they shared data, but it didn't connect on the story level. It was just charts and data.
Those are good ones. Yeah, that's right. So, we understand the importance of data visualization and data storytelling and about improving our narratives, right? Making data informed decisions. So how, what should we do if we want to, build a story? Like, how do we begin to create something compelling that can really have, the people that we're presenting to, like, really motivate them, move them to action?
Yeah, I think it's about personalizing it to them, which is why it's an art and a science. There's a study done, which was a company in Africa, Feed the Children, that were trying to receive money to help with famine in Africa. And they did like an A/B test. So an A/B test is you do two different things to equally random populations, and you see which one has a better return. And so they sent out two memos to potential donors. The first one cited all accurate, 100% relevant data, like X number of people die of starvation every year, X number of people, all of this data, really sad data, but it wasn't personalized. It wasn't like a face. The B test pick one specific person. Her name was Rokia, and they had a picture of her, and they talked about how she suffers and how she's going to be like the X number of people that won't get to see their teen years, tween years. Long story short, I don't remember the exact change, but the Rokia one was like 4x double the donations because they found something that people cared about because they were empathetic. They cared about, they could put a face to it. So I guess to your point of what are some strategies, make it connect with the audience, find out what the stakeholder cares about. And it doesn't have to be something like feeding the children in Africa. It could be business related. If the stakeholder cares about revenue growth, a story of a customer that failed because we didn't do the right thing that our data shows, which hurt our revenue, hurt the customer. That's why it's an art, is you have to find those things. It's not like you can just go into a program and output a chart and say, done, I'm storytelling. You need to really connect with the stakeholder, understand them. So when we teach this at university, it's like a carpenter. What do they say? It's like measure twice, cut once. You prep everything is like 85% of it. And then actually doing it is like 10, 15%.
Yeah. So do your research, know who you're talking to, what matters to them, and build upon that.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, you still have to be a storyteller, which is the art part of it. Is some people are really good at data, but they're not good at telling a story. We have frameworks and stuff that will help, but it could still come off as robotic unless you're a good storyteller. And it's one of the reasons I love this, is it blends both sides of the brain, because you have to be creative, but you also have to understand the data element of it. That's why it's harder, easier said than done.
Yeah. And how do we become good storytellers?
I think following those principles, right? Like understanding your stakeholders. I have found one of the biggest challenges from students that I teach and executives that I coach is they build the story from their lens. And that's not necessarily the right answer. Is you want to build it from the stakeholders' lens. What's relevant for them? Easier said than done. Sometimes it's hard to get into someone else's shoes and show empathy. But I think the second thing that is more technical is use one of these frameworks that said, okay, here's the problem, here's the data that validates the problem, how is it going to help us, what are we going to do to fix it, how is that going to impact the bottom line. And there's these different types of frameworks out there that you can basically plug and play. Like I said, it still might sound robotic unless you add in the personalization, but when we teach those frameworks, for example, people are instantly sending out better stories, even if they're not perfect. And then it's getting feedback. A lot of us don't want to ask after, what went well, what didn't. But if we get that feedback and someone's like, well, you didn't engage with me enough, it didn't connect with me, that's good data points to, just keep practicing and trying. Unfortunately, there's no magic bullets with everything. Practice makes perfect, and do your research, I think, are the high level summaries.
I like what you mentioned, right? Don't be afraid to ask, right? Lessons learned are lessons learned. So we can walk away with something and we can get better, and we'll tell an amazing story one day and that'll be it, right? That's
exactly.
Fantastic. Anything else, any other tips and tricks, techniques that you want to share with us?
Well, I think, part of the story is the visual, right? So you have the narrative, but you also have the visual. And if we circle back to the visual for a second, one of the things I see a lot, which is something to avoid, is clutter. People have this concept when they don't understand visualization. For some reason, they're like, let's throw all the data into there. And when I ask them why, they're like, I don't know why. I thought we did because we have the data. And so it's this art of not simplifying, but prioritizing. Like, for example, if we're trying to show a change in our data, in one of our KPIs, and we show like there's 26% of our customers have churned, sometimes you just show the number 26 and that's sufficient. You don't have to show, because you think about the brain is interpreting this, and everything you add into the visual, it has to process, whether it's relevant or not. So, there's some people that say, don't even use grid lines, don't use any categories that are irrelevant, because the brain needs to look at it and then decide, nope, it's not relevant. Take all of those choices out. So I think one of the big things for visualizations is less is more, prioritize. And sometimes if you have two questions, you should have two visuals. You shouldn't try to put them all in the same visualization.
I like that. That's a good tip. So if you're a business leader and you're watching this and you want to get some more tips and techniques on how to get started, I'm going to be sharing some resources in a moment. I'll put them on the screen. And some of them include something that you can reach out to Kevin as well. There we go. And I love that page that you have, Turning Data into Wisdom. Kevin, you want to tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, it's an educational website that has articles, assessments, some video tutorials, some job aids of everything related to data literacy, whether you're an expert, an intermediate, or a basic, goes from like what it is. So it's just a free educational resource. And there's a paid for level, but most of the stuff is free. We can just go in and spend a little time each day or each week increasing your data literacy skills.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kevin. Well, if you don't have any more questions, I don't think so, then we will be ending our session now. Thank you, Kevin, for joining with us. We enjoyed having you and enjoying your expertise in the data visualization and digital literacy and data literacy of all things. So thank you. And join us next month for our next podcast, always related to data, AI, and how to put those two together in our businesses. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you, Kevin, again. Talk all soon. Bye-bye.